Hello, everybody. I am Yağmur, the host of Sales Still Human Masterclass series, and welcome to today's Masterclass and happy Friday. So, today I am going to be asking Winnet some questions about something every salesperson does, but few think about actually how you open a client conversation. So, let's welcome Winnet first. Hi, Winnet, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Good to see everyone again, and welcome to the session.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, I do want to talk about the client conversations, but especially the most important one, how to open a client conversation today with you. And it's like we talk a lot in these sessions about the sales frameworks and processes, and the very first moments of client conversation is a bit much more specific than those frameworks and processes. So I did want to pick this topic to ask you. I presume most salespeople, when they think about where a deal is won or lost, they picture the middle of the conversation like the pitch, the objection handling, the negotiation process. I wonder your point of view on this actually. Do you agree with that? That the middle of conversation is where deals are won or lost?
Okay, so good, interesting topic. So first and foremost, in my career, I have lost deals at the beginning, in the middle, or closer to the end of the sales conversation. And the reality is, a deal is not in until the contract is signed or the agreement is signed, and you have that client commitment. And a deal or an opportunity can stall or falter at any stage of the sales process. It can falter in discovery, it can falter when you're demoing, when you're providing the solution. It can even falter once you've got some form of an understanding, but you're not able to agree the terms. So a deal can falter at any stage. However, in my experience, if you want to focus on the right type of opportunities, what is super important is actually how you engage in that early stage discussion and that conversation. And so, how you start the engagement is a really, really good indicator of how that process is actually going to naturally flow from there. So my kind of, that's a long-winded answer for you, but the simple thing is it can falter anywhere, but how you start the engagement has a massive impact on what happens next and the direction that that interaction with that particular client moves in.
Yeah, but probably most people do not think about that, I believe. Like, I'm not sure about that, of course. But I think we can speak a bit about the common mistakes that you see salespeople make in the openings of client conversations. Maybe you can also mention about overall mistakes happens in discover meetings.
Yeah, and I mean, whether it's a discovery meeting or even if it's an earlier stage meeting than that, I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that salespeople have one way of doing something, or they've been given a script, they've been given instruction of something that they are required to follow. And the reality is that sales has evolved. Our buyers have evolved, and it is no longer just a case of you can turn up and you can throw up in a sense and just actually tell them everything that you know about the particular product or service or solution. So for me, the biggest mistake is that salespeople actually aren't adaptable. They are literally turning up to just deliver whatever pitch that they have in their mind. Why? Why is this happening? Well, first and foremost, look, buyers have more choice. There's more competition. There's more awareness than there ever has been. So rather than actually pitching from that first interaction, I think it's super important for salespeople to actually understand context, to understand where the buyer is in their process, actually what is on the buyer's mind. And a lot of salespeople that I see, I hear in coaching conversations, they don't focus on this. They are literally hell bent on what is the quickest route to us closing a particular deal. So the mindset that they enter some of these early stage conversations in is completely wrong. There isn't really a discovery process. It's more of a thank you. I'm so glad to have you on this call. I want to maximize how much time I spend speaking so that you understand how wonderful we are and how much of an amazing product that we have and so on and so forth. So what ends up happening is that salespeople basically spend 70-80% of that initial meeting talking. And ultimately, it should be the other way around. The whole purpose of an early stage meeting is to have the client speak most of the time. Now, if the client is the one that is asking all the questions, then guess what? They're in control. They are the ones dictating actually direction of that meeting. And in sales, it is the salesperson's responsibility to guide the conversation, to guide the questions. So if you're a salesperson and all of these questions are coming at you, you need to take back control. But also, you need to focus and understand how much time are you spending on talking in that early stage meeting versus how much time are you actually spending on listening. And when I say listening, I mean actually listening to really deeply understand rather than just to wait for the client to stop talking so you can just share whatever it is that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I do hear you. So I think the clients tending to ask questions to the salespeople. That is why salespeople are kind of like, okay, let me tell you about our business, our platform, our solution, and da da da. So yeah, maybe the thing there is prospecting clients asking lots of questions. So salespeople should be conscious about that maybe and find some ways for themselves to just to be the person asking the questions, to be the person guiding the conversation. So I think there can be some tips and I don't know, some things that salespeople should think on that part, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, first and foremost, I think if I'm a salesperson speaking to a new client or prospect, the first thing I want to know is actually why am I talking to this person, right? So why did this particular client or prospect download that white paper? Why did they fill out the contact us form? What was the reason that actually made them want to have this particular conversation or accept that meeting invite? Because generally speaking, the more I understand about their context, about their situation, about what research they've already done, the easier it is for me as a salesperson to be able to guide that conversation or to share the most relevant information with that client. Otherwise, what am I actually going to share? I'm just going to share whatever I think is important or whatever I have assumed that that client is interested in. And you know what? The world has changed because what I find is that in so many early stage conversations now, clients have done so much research, right? They've been on your website, they've checked you out on LinkedIn, they've read up a little bit about you. So you know what? By virtue of all of that activity, they have probably made some assumptions about you. They've probably categorized you and said that actually you are good at this particular thing and you're probably not good at this particular thing. So before you as a salespeople person share lots of stuff, I think it's really important for you to understand, look, right, what led them here? How much do they know? What research have they done? What conclusions have that research led them to? And what would be the best use of this particular time? You know, what information is it that they are really looking for and what stage of the process are they at? So for me, it's the more I understand, the easier it becomes for me to one, guide the conversation, but to help that particular client and give them whatever it is that they are looking for.
Yeah, I got it. Do you think is there an optimal duration for those early stage conversations? Like maybe how long should those meetings be? Are there any standards or things to be careful about?
Well, look, I think in today's kind of technology-driven environment, a lot of early stage conversations tend to happen digitally. You know, Zoom, Teams, etc. And I think the most important thing is to set the agenda and the objective for the meeting before the meeting, right? And what that ultimately means is actually asking that question. Actually, why are we meeting? Right? Why did you want to have this meeting and what is that objective? The objective will ultimately dictate and determine how long the meeting needs to be. Because sometimes it's easy to have an early stage meeting where actually you just want to understand a little bit more contextually about what they're looking for and a little bit about them, but they are seeing that because of all of the research that they've done as actually they want a demo. Now, so you want to make sure that you are both on the same page. And what is the objective of that early stage meeting? And what are you looking collectively to achieve by the end of that meeting?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to ask about, people are allocating some time to speak with and to learn more about the solution or the product. And I think it's important to ask you, how quickly do you think a buyer has actually made up their mind about whether you are worth their time?
Yeah, so a really good question. And I, in my experience, I think, look, you're always being judged, right? Consciously or unconsciously, you are always being judged, and people are not going to tell you what they think. They don't want to get into that uncomfortable conversation with you and say, actually, we've already made our mind up. What I often tend to find is that how you show up and how you enter into that conversation is ultimately going to influence and determine whether that conversation moves forward in a positive way or not. So for me, one of the most important things that a salesperson has to do is they've got to make it okay for the client to say no, right? They've got to make it okay for the client to be able to walk out of that meeting without feeling that they have to do something with you. So for me, my early stage conversations, I make it explicitly clear that, look, it's an exploratory conversation. And if by the end of that conversation, there's value in us kind of speaking again, great. But if there isn't, then, no harm, no foul. There is absolutely no issues with that. Why do I do that? Because I know that the longer this process goes on and the more conversations I have with the client, the more invested that process is, right? And I want to know up front, actually, if there isn't an opportunity here, if the client is in research phase, if they aren't ready to make a commitment, or if they're not ready to involve other stakeholders or whatever, then guess what? I want to make sure that I manage that opportunity in the best possible way. Also, if the client feels that actually they're not ready, then I want them to be able to say no, but I also want them to be able to say, look, actually the opportunity is still there. We'll come back to it in 2 months, 3 months, whatever that time period is. So if I want to manage my time effectively and focus on the best opportunities, I need to set that up from the first interaction that I have with every client.
Yeah, something came into my mind. You know that I am working with startup and scale up founders, and I do see this a lot. They do not understand actually if the prospecting client or the client is in their research phase. So, you have any recommendation about that? Because you said maybe they are in their research period, and I think salespeople, and of course in startup and scale up businesses, most of the time sales is driven by founders or managing directors. Any tips to understand that a client is in their research phase?
Yeah, and very simply, it's actually ask them. Most salespeople don't ask them.
Makes sense.
Most salespeople launch into a pitch. Just actually say, look, ask them, where are you in your process? What research have you done? What information are you looking to gather? Understand their time frame, right? And it is only through curiosity that as a salesperson, you're going to be able to uncover where that particular buyer is and what they're thinking about and so on and so forth. A good way subconsciously of thinking about this is that what you'll find is that when a buyer is in research phase, they're going to have a lot of questions for you. They're going to have a lot of things that they haven't considered, and they are probably investigating whether an approach or an idea is worth pursuing. So I call this interest phase, right? And actually in interest phase, they don't know what the right solution is. They just know that perhaps they need to explore lots of different things, but they don't know what good looks like. A really, really good example is, let's just say you're a founder and you are looking for a way to generate incoming leads,
Yeah.
right? Now, you're going to get some founders that buy into the hacks. They get all of these emails or these LinkedIn messages saying, I can get you 10 qualified meetings every month, yada, 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 whatever. And they start interacting with those individuals. They're going to learn very quickly. They might even test them, but they're going to learn very quickly that actually it isn't as easy as someone makes out to be. On the flip side, if they continue to do their research, they're going to realize that actually there are so many different shades of what marketing can do. And every single agency that they speak to, person that they speak to, is going to have a specialism. One might be PR, one might be digital, one might be creative, whatever it is. So it is these when a founder or when anyone is doing early stage research, just listen actively to the type of questions that they're asking. Are they asking generic questions, or are they asking very specific pain related questions around the things that you solve? In my experience, their questioning tends to be more higher level rather than really deep. And as the conversations progress, the level of deeper conversations around specific pain, around specific solutions, around the root cause tend to get really more and more and more direct. So early stage, it tends to be generic, broad, but the more intentional the client becomes, the more directed those questions and their requirements for information, for knowledge actually start becoming as well. They'll be very explicit, and they'll ask you like, how do you do this? Or instead of what's your availability in this particular area?
Makes sense. So, what do I understand from all of the things that you say actually? There can be a salesperson just started to work in a new company, and actually it's okay, like they can be in early stage conversations, because you're saying that actually the early stage conversations are about asking questions, understanding clients' needs, and it's not about you just making a demo of your solution, answering all the questions and something like that. But yeah, the cases usually for lots of businesses probably are not like that. Salespeople for early stage conversations, they do want themselves to know everything while they enter the.
Yeah, yeah. So look, it's an interesting one, right? A lot of companies, when they recruit salespeople, they want the salesperson to go through this huge onboarding process, learn everything about our product, our service, our solution, what we do, how great we are. And it sounds great, but actually, a lot of that is what I would call interference. The most important thing that a salesperson needs to understand is actually who are they going to sell to, the challenges, the pains, the symptoms. What are the underlying deep rooted issues that an organization has to have? And how does all of this insight, is it interconnected? For me, optimize on understanding the buyer first. Because the more you understand the buyer, where they are, their situation, and so on and so forth, the easier it becomes to be able to then match a solution to the buyer's needs. I think for me, that question you asked earlier about actually when does a buyer lose interest, or the equivalent of that question, it's simply because a buyer actually sees that the salesperson is just looking out for themselves. They see it as though actually the salesperson is trying to sell rather than trying to help someone. For me, the essence of sales is all about helping buyers make conscious, considered choices. And the only way that I can do that actively is by actually putting myself in the buyer's shoes and say, look, what would the buyer actually need right now? What is the thing that's going to be most important to the buyer right now? And as soon as a salesperson starts to put themselves in the buyer's shoes, it completely changes their mindset, because actually it isn't about talking about a demo, talking about a contract, talking about the terms and conditions. All they're thinking about right now is, what is this going to mean if we implemented this in our business? How am I going to manage the change? Is it even possible? Can we even do this? Right? So all of those early stage conversations are, a lot of them are emotive. A lot of them are actually trying to evaluate whether this is even possible. So the salesperson's role is just to guide that process. So rather than thinking about the solution, thinking of talking about products and whatever, actually it's just listening, and it's just understanding where the buyer really is and all the things that are going through their mind. So for me, those early stage conversations, you don't need to know the product inside out. You just need to be a very good listener. You need to be able to actually just understand the buyer and what their challenges are, and how those bits are kind of interconnected. And then the product knowledge, you know what, you can learn that over time, because because you're gonna be working for that organization. The more situations you find yourself in, the easier it's going to be for you to understand and apply that product knowledge and that product information.
Yeah, this topic is also related, I believe, about the pipeline and the pipeline stages for the business. If the pipeline stages are like didn't defined good enough, like if the manager or director, if there is no sales plan or sales process planning or something like that, then it is really hard for salespeople to manage it. So, for example, demo shouldn't be the first stage of the pipeline. And if the plan it doesn't start with demo, if it starts understanding a buyer, early stage conversation, and these are the questions that you need to ask and learn from the client, yeah, it should be easier. It shall be easier for a salesperson, but it is related to the business's sales process design, I believe, right?
100%, right? And here's the thing: the selling organization wants their salespeople to follow a process, and that process may have some structure, it may have some kind of hard elements to it, or some stages to it. What businesses often fail to do is to actually understand the buying process, because your sales process on its own actually is irrelevant if it's not aligned to how a buyer acquires or purchases that particular service or solution that you offer. So you have to understanding the buying journey is actually equally as important. It's probably more important than your sales process, because if you understand the buying process well, you make your sales process aligned to that buying journey, right? And funny, when you were speaking there, I had a couple of coaching calls this morning, and one of the most interesting things for me is when I look back in hindsight, salespeople are so positive, they are so optimistic. And this particular client I was working with, they showed me what their pipeline looked like. And these guys have got 4 stages to their pipeline. What was so interesting is that every single opportunity, they literally have a client conversation and they put it into the middle of their funnel. So the middle of their funnel has 90% of their opportunities. Now, when I started just segmenting and I looked at 10 opportunities, every single one of those opportunities shouldn't be in that stage in the pipeline. So the point you were making, Yamur, is so true. When a business doesn't understand the buying process, what they do is they default to actually just putting deals in whatever stage in the pipeline they feel that they belong in. And actually, that's where a lot of businesses go wrong. The pipeline stages have to reflect and mirror the buying process, but also there has to be very clear entry and exit criteria of each stage, right? Why does that deal have to be in that particular stage? It's got to be explicit, and it's got to be rules that are set up. The salesperson, you can't leave the salesperson to do that. The manager, the leader has to be responsible for that. They are responsible for kind of setting that standard, the center line, the rules of the road in place for the salesperson to actually follow.
Yeah, technology tries to solve this situation actually. For example, like some CRM tools where you manage your pipeline, like in a Kanban board, maybe you are just trying to move the deal to another stage. So
Yeah.
technology is trying to help that. You can, for example, like set some rules there. If you didn't answer these questions, then you cannot move this deal to another stage or something like that. Technology tries to change it, force salespeople to change their mindset maybe. But the issue there, I don't know, it's not the exact solution because the answers can be vague and the answers can be wrong or something like that. But maybe to change the mindset, it's we shouldn't trust the technology, but trust the process. Maybe I don't know.
Well, listen, I think technology is an enabler, and
Yeah.
technology can help us do amazing things at a much quicker pace, or it can help us do stupid things at a much quicker pace, right? So if the thinking behind what we want to achieve is not in place, to your words, if the process is not well understood, designed, and documented manually, and we ask technology to create it in the absence of the thinking, it's going to move us in a direction that we don't want to go. So you're absolutely right in that actually, yes, we need the process, we need the written instruction, and then we need the technology to help us to embed it into our systems, workflows, and processes. But in the absence of that thinking being done, what often happens is that organizations leave the technology to say, right, we'll take this off-the-shelf process that you have and we'll just use that. And here's the thing, in my experience in sales, I have never come across two companies who have an identical sales process. There are nuances, there are different ways of working, there are different expectations, different cultures, and so on and so forth. So no two processes, in my experience, have ever been the same. So you have to design that from ground up, but taking into context the buying cycle and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, super important point. And yeah, there's so much there that we could go into.
Yeah, and also like you cannot copy the questions that AI gave you. Of course, you can utilize them. It can like maybe make you think more properly, but you shouldn't copy at the end. I just
Yeah.
understood that from what you said.
Yeah, well, 100%, right? If you leave technology to do your thinking, then guess what? Everything it creates is gonna sound amazing. But in the absence of you doing the thinking, it's probably gonna send you in a direction that you didn't want to go in. And you lose so much time because by the time you realize, yeah, the amount of time you've lost is immense.
Exactly. And salespeople's time is very important question.
100%.
And so to wrap up today's session, my last question would be if someone's got a first meeting with a prospecting client tomorrow, and let's say that the person is not a very experienced salesperson, what's the one thing you tell them to change about how they open it?
I will answer this question in two different ways. There is a reason why you have one mouth and two ears. It's a very famous saying. Use those elements in the proportion that you have them. Spend more time listening, less time talking. And secondly, seek first to understand, right? Be really, really curious and just try and understand as much about the client or prospect's world, their scenario, what they're thinking, what stage they're at, because that's the most important thing that you can do. Rather than showing up and throwing up and giving them lots of information, actually just try and understand. Just try and be curious. Understand what their challenges are. Understand what the underlying pain points are. Understand how big the issue is, right? Who else is involved in the process? How long has this particular issue been visible in the business? Who does it impact? How does it show up in their business? The more curious you are, the more information that you're going to be able to extract from the client. And once you have that information, you're going to be in a much better position to be able to respond with something that's probably more credible, probably more relevant and useful to that client's exact situation. Now, I will caveat this. You will get into some early stage conversations where clients demand to know what a solution might look like. And generally speaking, if you are in that situation, if you get pushed in a corner, well, the simple answer is this. Look, there are several solutions that might be right for you. Without having the context, it's difficult for me to tell you exactly which one, but clients similar to you will actually consider this solution, which has these benefits, or other clients will consider this solution, which has these benefits. So you are still giving them a response, but you are also making sure that they understand that without the context, you are unable to give them more direction. And here's the thing, the follow-up information that the client gives you will tell you where they are. Because if they hadn't considered either of those, they're still in research phase. If they actually have an idea of which one is more suited to their thing, well, explore that. Don't assume that the one they've chosen is the right one. Keep that exploratory tone going, keep the curiosity going, and keep asking more questions, because make sure that they haven't made any assumptions, you haven't made any assumptions, and ultimately your intent has to be right. That's the most important thing here. Look, and that intent is all about helping the client find a solution that's going to be right for them and it's going to be right for you.
Yeah, and this way you can bring the right expert for the next meeting, maybe if you didn't understand everything
Totally.
in a good way, then who will be managing the next processes? You cannot decide that. So yeah,
Exactly.
let's
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much, Vinit.
Thank you.
And also thank you everybody watching this session. For the ones in the UK, we wish you a great long weekend and a happy Friday. See you. Bye bye.